In the NFL, hours after backing out of the Maxx Crosby trade, the Ravens pivoted to free agent defensive end Trey Hendrickson. Adam Schefter reporting that the All-Pro gets a 4-year, $112 million deal, $60 million guaranteed. Here's Ravens GM Eric DeCosta this afternoon. Listen to this.
We came to a point probably after we lost Tyler, where as we're trying to find the best way for us to get better as a football team, Trey kind of made a lot of sense as a possible guy to look at. So we started some discussions with he and his agent, thinking that, potentially we'd have 2 pass rushers on the defensive line on both sides of the line. Again, I think it was disappointing, to us, and probably in a way, potentially disappointing probably to Trey as well.
DeCosta making a reference to Tyler Linderbaum, who signed a big contract, leaving the Ravens to the Raiders. Senior NFL insider Adam Schefter joining us now. Schefter, the last 24 hours, they've been quite a blur in Baltimore. Walk us through the Ravens signing Hendrickson and then backing out of that Maxx Crosby trade with the Raiders.
Well, Kevin, it's the reverse order, actually, because what happened here was Maxx Crosby and his wife showed up in Baltimore for what they thought would be a medical and a coronation and a celebration dinner on Tuesday night in Baltimore. And instead, doctors expressed concerns about the physical that he took. Other doctors reviewed the results. We don't know exactly what was in there, but there was enough cause of concern that the Ravens backed out of the deal, in the words of the Raiders, and decided to send Maxx Crosby back to Las Vegas. And instead, at that point in time, once they felt like they couldn't move forward due to the condition of his knee that underwent surgery 8 weeks ago, he spent the last 7 weeks on crutches, they pivoted to Trey Hendrickson. Now, you heard Eric DeCosta talk about their grand plan of pairing both defensive ends together, Maxx Crosby and Trey Hendrickson. And Trey Hendrickson was disappointed about the fact that that did not become a reality, that in the end, ultimately, Crosby goes back to the Raiders and Hendrickson reaches agreement on a 4-year deal worth up to $120 million in Baltimore to now provide the type of pass rush the Ravens thought they would be getting from Maxx Crosby when they agreed to a trade for him on Friday night.
All right, so now the Raiders, they lose out on 2 first-round picks from the Ravens, and Crosby now goes back to Vegas. What's next for the defensive end here coming off that knee injury?
I think the Raiders are right back where they thought they would be, where they would be open to trading Maxx Crosby. They've taken calls from other teams, but they would have to get an offer they couldn't refuse. And you have to ask yourself, what team is going to give an offer that the Raiders can't refuse for a player right now who just didn't pass a physical, who essentially is 2 months removed from surgery, who is not going to be fully healthy until opening day of 2026, and who's coming off surgery to his meniscus, bone, and cartilage area. So there are questions. Now, his doctor, Neil Elatrosh, says that Maxx Crosby is right on track, right where he needs to be, but he may not be able to go through the type of physical to make a team want to trade for him for another couple months. There's a lot that's up in the air, a lot that still will play out here, and it's certainly possible that he could be back playing for the Raiders again this season.
Okay, and Schefter, you got more breaking news in the NFL, stuff that you're reporting, that the Colts and quarterback Daniel Jones have agreed on a 2-year, $88 million contract. Jones led the league in passing in the first 10 weeks last year, but his season ended in week 14 with an Achilles rupture. He's still rehabbing, and you saw the Colts season nosedive after he went out. And back here with Adam Schefter, the quarterback market turns its attention now to another former first-round pick in Kyler Murray. What's the latest after Murray was officially released today by the Cardinals?
Well, now that he's a free agent, he is free to sign with any other team. Let's keep in mind that the Arizona Cardinals will pay him $36.4 million this year, and he can go play where he wants for essentially the veteran minimum. One person told me there's a strong likelihood that Murray's going to wind up in Minnesota in the Vikings quarterback room with J.J. McCarthy. Another source said that he would be shocked if Murray did not wind up in Minnesota. So all signs point to Kyler Murray winding up with the Minnesota Vikings. We'll see if and when they can hammer out that agreement and get it done, but I would expect that to happen here in the coming day or two.
Another quarterback now on the market, Kirk Cousins, also
physical. And Maxx Crosby and his wife arrived in Baltimore. He went through a physical on Tuesday. The plan was to have a celebratory day, a dinner out that night. It never materialized. Doctors looked at his knee and had concerns. There were physicals done, MRIs done, and ultimately the Baltimore Ravens had the information and decided that they could not move forward with a deal that would give the Raiders 2 first-round draft picks. Now, Maxx Crosby's knee surgeon, Dr. Neil Elitrosh, pointed out that Maxx Crosby is exactly where he is supposed to be at this point in time from a significant knee injury that involved damage to the meniscus, bone, and cartilage. They still believe he'll be ready for opening day 2026, but it's going to take some time to get there first. Not a simple process. So in the interim, now Crosby reverts back to the Raiders. He was in their building today. They are taking calls from teams, but again, they wouldn't move him unless they got the asking price that they were seeking, which last time was at least 2 first-round draft picks. Whether there's a team out there willing to compensate them to that high a level, whether they're willing to budge off those demands, those requests, we'll see how this evolves. But for the time being, Maxx Crosby is once again a Las Vegas Raider.
Yeah, just a wild situation, right? There's no other way to look at this.
And
although
as for
you
Trey Hendrickson.
Oh, go ahead, Adam. Tell us more.
No, I didn't know whether you would team me up or I was supposed to just take myself there.
Keep
My apologies.
going. No,
Laura.
Adam,
Essentially,
go.
Trey Hendrickson, once the Maxx Crosby deal didn't get done, basically the Baltimore Ravens reached agreement with Trey Hendrickson on a 4-year, $112 million deal that could be worth up to $120 million. It's a situation where Trey Hendrickson had been talking to the Ravens, he'd been talking to the Commanders, he'd been talking to the Eagles, he'd been talking to the Buccaneers. There were a lot of options, a lot of things that came available here in the last 48 hours or so. Tough decision, but he was looking for stability. And now he stays in the AFC North, where he will go up against his former team and his former quarterback, Joe Burrow, twice a year. The Ravens still have more moves to make, but they landed a big chess piece today in the form of Trey Hendrickson.
Excellent work, Adam. By the way, reminder to people, Adam's been breaking all this news. It's been a wild time for all of us as fans. I can't even imagine what Adam's been trying to manage on that end. Mina, I want to point this out before we talk through the Baltimore side of all this. I've spent some time talking today to Stefania Bell, our medical expert here at ESPN. She's pointed out that all these teams can conduct their own physicals, right? These players come to them. They get imaging done by those teams. It's up to the teams about their comfort level on these players. Take that for what you will with how you want to parse through this, but any issue on how Baltimore handled all of this?
I think it's really hard to know. There's so many unknowns here. It is not outside the realm of possibility that the Ravens looked at a player who's pushing 29, who's played more defensive snaps than any defensive lineman in football over the last 6 years, and saw something that concerned them. It's also not outside the realm of possibility that they got cold feet because they gave up so much to get him. To me, this is something where over time we'll probably find out what happened through Maxx Crosby and his play. If he returns and he looks great, I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to look at the Ravens with a little bit of a side eye. But if he does struggle, if it takes him a while to get back to health, if he's not the same moving forward, I think we'll look back at this decision and say, yeah, the Ravens were right. So I guess to answer your question, to go back to it, for me, it's still kind of an incomplete. I think there's a lot left to be determined.
Yeah, it looks weird. It looks odd. There's a lot of question marks attached to it. That doesn't mean it was malicious in intent. That doesn't mean it lacks integrity. They were allowed to make the decision because of the time frame and how the NFL operates, the legal tampering period, and just recently when the new league year starts. They're in the right, I guess, legal process of going about having the opportunity to change their minds. I feel for Maxx because now there's a giant cloud and question mark of what's his future going to look like. I also just fall under the belief that this is an amazing opportunity for other organizations that might believe.
You said the Eagles earlier?
Yeah, Philadelphia, Washington, the Bears, the Rams, the Bills, that just, I continue to hear this statement. They weren't comfortable with the knee given what the compensation was going to be. So if the compensation changes, does that make other teams more comfortable with the knee and the long-term prognosis health-wise of that knee?
Yeah, Mina, when you think of some of those teams that Dan laid out there, anybody sound attractive to you as maybe getting, I don't want to call it a bargain for Maxx Crosby, but based on what it was before, it'll seem like a bargain.
Yeah, I think it's going to be diminished value, not just because of, the potential of an injury or their own valuation, but because there are fewer bidders now than there would have been at the beginning of free agency, most likely. Dan mentioned some of the teams that I'd be intrigued by. I'll throw out another one, New England. They're picking 31st in the draft, of course, in the first round, but they still have a ton of cap space, and I think a pretty significant need in terms of an edge rusher. So, that's a team that's been linked as maybe a potential trade target for A.J. Brown. We'll see if that has any legs. But if not, I would be very comfortable, if I'm New England, using that 31st overall pick to go after Maxx Crosby.
Yeah, MK, I think we were talking about it. It comes down to, if you're the Raiders and you're just 24 hours removed from the emotion of it, where do you stand on what are you willing to accept? Or do you want to play the long game and think that his value is going to get back to where it was, or it's going to increase? Do you want to wait closer to the draft? Are you willing to try to hold on and have him play for the Raiders this year? But then there's also that opposite risk of what happens if, the value takes a drastic decrease. And I think if you're the Raiders, you just have to be having those intense conversations. If I were them, I'm trying to take the best I can right now and understanding it's not going to be the best. And I think, or what it was. And I think if you're other teams, like, hey, what are we willing to maybe be a little bit more aggressive on, knowing that we're going to get a player that if we are right, gosh, we're going to get an absolute steal here.
Yeah, and a very motivated steal, right? Because you bet Maxx Crosby wants to come back and prove that the Ravens screwed up here. The funny thing about the Raiders is, although their leverage has decreased somewhat because it's like later 2 days into free agency, but you understand, right? They still maintain, I think, a decent amount of leverage because they have so much damn money. This is not a team that desperately needs to move off of Maxx Crosby, even though they made a ton of signings in free agency. They had a ton of money. With Crosby back on the books, they still have cap space, not just this year, but next year as well, over $100 million. This is what happens when you have a roster that desperately needs additions, that doesn't have players outside of Bowers and who need to be extended, and a quarterback coming in on a rookie contract. You do have money to play with. So I think, to your point, like, that's something the Raiders have to consider here as well. Yes, you're listening to trade offers. Yes, you're considering another first-round pick package. But if they're not attractive at all, I would seriously consider retaining him if I'm Las Vegas, because you can afford it.
Yeah, a reminder, too, on Crosby's contract. It's not like he's some sort of rental. I mean, he's signed through 2029 in the next 4 years, right, with $59 million in guaranteed money over the next 2. But when it comes to his production on the field, and I realize we got to see him go back out there and do it again, the expectations are that he can. Crosby was doing this solo, 69.5 career sacks since 2019. Yeah. No other Raider had 15 in that 7-year span.
I mean, if you're the Raiders, if we're being honest, you don't necessarily want to be great this year. So, because you want higher picks in 2027, if we're being honest, we're building.
Well, Dan, I mean, when you see the other names that were on that list that we just had on the screen, they've gotten some big names there. Sure. They got the center in Linderbaum. I mean, what do you think about some of the signings that they've made here?
They've had a great offseason so far. I mean, I love Linderbaum because of the young quarterback. I think Jalen Naylor and the speed. If you've watched Mendoza, the best pass he throws is the deep ball, the go ball, or the back shoulder, so speedster there. I also like the fact that we're building a defense for him, too. Yeah. The best thing you can give a young quarterback, good defense.
All right, so we'll talk about the other side of this with Trey Hendrickson.